I consider Hilmar one of the world's experts in this phenomenon, and I hope it's very clear soon why he's been attracted to crypto as a medium for creating and autonomously enforcing simple but powerful economic primitives. So please join me in welcoming Hilmar Pétursson. Yeah, so Hilmar, I'm happy for you to react to that, but also maybe an initial question is, what does it take in your mind to create a virtual world, a virtual economy?
This is kind of the core purpose of CTP, to make virtual worlds more meaningful than real life. And that obviously maybe sounds, well, it sounds crazy, and it might also sound evil. But it has forced us a lot to think about like what is really real life. And it's been like anything really that we've done. It's been a challenge by watching what our players do. Because they very soon started to behave in a way where everything happening in Eve was happening for real. And to us that made the game is like a toy almost. It's very hard to not see it like a toy. Every time I play EVE Online, it's like watching somebody do a card trick you taught them to do, but they're messing it up. Always having this, no, not like that, not like that. It's torturous. But the players didn't feel like that. They felt it was real. And then that sort of coincides with this like crypto phenomenon, which is equally not real. Yes. And that relates to our economy, which are equally not real.
Yeah.
So we basically spent most of our waking hours in a game system that was designed by a council of economists under Eisenhower post the World War II. And their design premise was, how do we get us out of the post-economy slump? And they came up with the idea of we should consume. This is documented. This is not a conspiracy theory. This version of capitalism we live in was designed by people very specifically. It's not emergent for the purposes of consumption, and it obviously succeeded. But it is a game system. If you trace it down, none of it is really real. Like the money isn't real, the jobs aren't real, the company aren't real. None of it is really real. And crypto proves that so well, because out of like a new, fresh foundations that nobody believed in, companies were built, coins were built, memes, all the things you went over.
Yes, yes.
But it obviously started on an agreed premise that it wasn't real. So sometimes we get fooled into this idea that our real life is real. Our real life is basically buying a house that is too big, taking out a mortgage, so we always have to be at work, not at the house. We don't meet our kids because we're la la la.
And maybe worth saying, Hilmar, is that I think if I understand you properly, by not real, you don't mean has no effect or no consequence or something. What you mean is that it is synthetic, right? As in, can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, so let's unpack it a little bit, because this obviously is very controversial, even inside CCP. And it's taken us a long time to kind of figure out, okay, what is meaningful and what is real. Those are like pretty fundamental things. And I have here in my many slides, like it goes to quantum physics, it's that deep. This is very helpful. This is from Immanuel Kant. He came up with this sort of mid-1800s rules for happiness: something to do, someone to love, and something to hope for. Something to do in the world today is basically jobs. Like, what is the something to do? It's jobs. They're a fairly recent invention. They're not very long-lasting.
No.
Like for most of our species' lifetime, we were not having jobs, but we have them now, and they are lacking in many ways. The stats are basically there are 8 billion people on the planet, 5 billion are working age, 3 billion would like to have a job, 1.3 billion have a job already. There's a problem, but only 200 million like what they're doing. So failed. Real life has failed in giving us something meaningful to do. Okay. Can we fix that? Okay, internet spaceships for mostly nerds like myself seem to generate happiness where people love their spaceships more than their cars because their spaceship gives them agency and navigating their social network. They give them status that the people that they care about, whereas their car is just like a Toyota that takes them to Walmart to
Purely
buy more memory
utilitarian,
for their
yeah.
PC to play more game online. Um, and that might sound very dystopic, but what we have found is because of the designs of EVE Online is extremely balancing, it's hideously complicated, it's a murder, death, scam simulator. I know it sounds a lot like crypto.
Yeah.
So, but it so happens when you live in a world like that, you need friends, and you really need them. And if they're there for you, the friendships become real. So when we survey EVE players and ask them, why are you playing this game for 20 years? Some people have logged into EVE every single day for 20 years. They say that is where my meaningful social network is. Like, these are my peeps. They come to my aid when I really need it. My real-life friends, the friendship have never been tested. I've never had to ask them to back me in a work campaign for over a year. You actually underestimate it. It's more like 10,000 people for a year rather than 100 people for a month. So anyway, so when we think about this, okay, EVE gives you something to do, more meaningful than the current crappy jobs the world is offering or not offering, gives you somebody to love, all the friendships you make through the game, where people attribute more value to those friendships than in the real world, because the real world doesn't really need you as much help as EVE Online. And then something to hope for, which in our expression is mostly the next expansion, which are the updates we deliver each game. Often underwhelming, sometimes good. So we've thought a lot about that. So, okay, if this is our core purpose as a company,
Right.
and that kind of parlays into crypto of just, okay, in the case of like something to do, sure, you are mining asteroids in space and making spaceships and vying for world domination, but you still have to pay for food and housing and electricity. Is there a way to make that sort of less convoluted than it is right now? Our end user license agreement states nothing here belongs to you. CCP owns all of it.
Yeah.
You get to access if you're in a good mood. So as I often say, it's like what I basically have is your sort of code of Hammurabi.
Yeah.
Nothing really has changed. There are 282 rules you must adhere to for me as Hammurabi.
Yeah, exactly.
Being okay with you accessing your spaceship.
Yeah.
And
that, how would you, like, what are the consequences of that? Does that limit the maximum amount of value that people can project into this? Like, how do you think about the consequences between a crypto system automatically enforcing certain things versus a fiat style? These are the rules.
So I think, and you said it well in your talk about whether people care about decentralization or not, is that EVE operates under a social consensus due to its ontology of having existed for 20 years. So because we have not confiscated assets for 20 years, we pull off a little bit the sort of London real estate trick. Assets in London are largely not confiscated, but if you adhere to the Code of Hammurabi in London, then they have they have appreciated, I think, for 1,000 years. So the
it's these
ontology
norms.
of that.
There's norms that have accumulated expectation between the players and, in this case, CCP.
Yeah, and I think that is, frankly, more important rather than, okay, here's a mathematical proof that it works, because people just largely don't really care much about math. I mean, they sometimes care about the people that care about math. So there's like a Maven effect of like, okay, if Eddie is cool with it, it's probably okay. But EVE Online, in many ways, like Bitcoin, derives its value from the social consensus that it's okay and it matters. And it took Bitcoin, I don't know when to count, 10 years, for it to matter in some way. I mean, it's probably still on a journey to actually matter. But that is more a social idea rather than
that's right. So there's
idea.
this like Lindy, this idea that something becomes Lindy to take for granted its trust properties. But then also maybe with like the mathematically guaranteed versus social norms, you're also limiting maybe the tail risk in an extreme case where, like, 30, 40 years from now, CCP decides they want to try something new.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And sometimes we do try something new and people have big problems with it. It's not all been roses. We literally have had protests. Our economy policies are not always allotted. We were just coming out of a period of scarcity where we forced famine basically in the game. And while famine can be tolerated or scarcity can be tolerated in real life because in some way it's a property of nature or God or whatever is your sort of idea of that. But when it's just a game designer with an Excel sheet, it's a little hard to swallow.
Yeah.
It's just like some person in Iceland changed the value in an Excel sheet and now I'm experiencing famine in my virtual world.
So can you say, given this, I'm beginning to see a little bit the role that maybe crypto plays for the future of Eve. Should we go there, or do you want to say more about how to actually make a virtual economy, like the primitive components of a virtual economy for it to work?
Yeah, so this literally is a Sankey chart for a tiny, tiny portion of the Eve economy. So here's a little corner of the Eve economy of like how materials compose into products, how products compose into larger products, how products compose into services. And this is very much kind of emergent phenomenon. We did start with pretty solid fundamental principles of just how we would implement asymmetry of resources on a certain topology, that is the map, how we would create sort of strategic corridors and bridges, etc., inside the star map, so that we would induce competition, cooperation to kind of bridge the asymmetries, etc., etc. And out of that, this emerged. So we have both been looking for an opportunity. Okay, if we were to remake it with hindsight, what would be the impetus to do that? And also, if we were to do that, could we build it on a different premise? So I think we've been thinking about that since 2015, where somebody explained to me how you could store spaceships on Bitcoin. There obviously were Bitcoin games being made as early as, I think, 2013, where people were doing like NFT-like just on the protocol, which is actually quite flexible. I mean, Bitcoin is in many ways an engineering marvel. Continues to be so. And that kind of unblocked this. Okay, could we take it more fundamentally, where we could kind of decouple the sort of code of Hammurabi of like, there's no Hammurabi, there are no clay taper rules, there are no police, there is no military. Could we go all the way that down? So there was a collision of these two things of like, okay, currently we're building on SQL Server, hosted in the Docklands area somewhere. Could we extend that further? And then could we take 20 years of hindsight and build from a different premise? And it's actually, we went all the way here of just, okay, how can we take the organic output of EVE Online, port it into a more sane structure. And the more and more we looked at it, okay, we have to take this model. This is actually an extremely interesting concept, which is called scale decoupling. Obviously, our world is very emergent from particles, from quantum mechanics. You get atoms from atoms, you get molecules from molecules, you get compounds from compounds, you get like la la la. But when you're doing biology, you don't need to learn quantum mechanics.
Right.
And there literally is a mathematical phenomenon called scale decoupling underneath all this. And we are now kind of reorganizing our brain into a mechanic like this, so that we also not only can build on better foundation, but we can have more emergent power from the emergent sort of social economy.
So what's happening is that in the context of the game, in this example, there are different levels, different types of special systems. Like there's the economic system, there's the literal spatial system between between solar systems and so on, and all these things. And each of them, even though they're all obviously part of the same literal object in the real world, there are little choke points between them where much simpler rules can be used by a higher layer to understand a lower layer, or vice versa. So can you give an example maybe of like...
our world is actually, it's quite easy to reason through our world and the emergent properties of our world, how from nature we get culture, from culture governance, infrastructure, commerce, and how we end up with fashion. So I think we have a fairly good understanding that governments can change governance that affects culture, but it doesn't really affect the core principles of nature.
That's right.
So and this is actually something that took a while for us to understand, because once you've established the premise that people feel the world is real, then people messing about certain aspects of the stack seems like we were updating like the real world.
Yeah, right.
If somebody were to come, hey, mankind, welcome to quantum mechanics 2.0. It's like the one you knew, except with the boson, Higgins boson is not here, etc. And of course, we have from an engineering and R&D, etc., had that happen. I mean, when Einstein came up with theory of relativity, there actually was like a protest letter about like this being heresy and evil, and it should be banned. And that in a way was an update to our reality. We didn't fully properly understand. And I mean, then with quantum mechanics, even Einstein had a problem. It's like the God would not design the world like this. This can't.
Yeah.
So we're kind of like, we understand through our own world that we are discovering more and more layers to it. So, okay, is there a way to replicate this into a game simulation? And is there a way to do it such that it gives us more love and happiness than our current emergent reality? Because the emergent reality is largely designed by people. It's not a creation of nature. And we see in the pinnacle of our creation, which are basically mega cities like London, people are generally more miserable and as defined by people in a city usually have fewer friends than people in a rural town somewhere in, I mean, when you travel, especially America, somewhere in rural America, it's the friendliest and happiest people you ever meet.
That's true, actually. So what do you think the key reason, what do you think the reasons for that are? And what are the types of things that you would recommend putting into a game or a virtual economy to mitigate that? Like, what are the key things?
So what we have deducted is that EVE Online is it's a harsh, brutal simulation where still nobody actually dies, but great loss can be experienced. And there is something magical about collective suffering, which I think we have lost sight of in our quest to make everyone happy. And I think anyone that's been in crypto for a while, the crypto winters are the collective suffering.
That's right.
That's why there's such bonds between people that have survived many winters in crypto. And this idea of collective suffering is an underestimated part of our biology. And you see people seek this. They go on an adventure trip together. I mean, offsites are a little bit more corporate offsites. They're not dangerous, but they're trying to be like, we're going to do something like trust exercises and things.
We're going to throw an axe.
Yeah, throw an axe. We do that a lot. But EVE Online does a different way to simulate this, where I now have to trust a non-trivial amount of people to really say what they do and do what they say. And if they don't, it's going to be a serious problem. We prepped for this for a year. If it goes wrong, we will lose everything. And then we will suffer together. Something about this cycle that strengthens and forges friendship. And this suffering has like a yin and yang to love being created.
It's almost like a Joseph Campbell-style hero's journey, but for communities of people.
That has been our conclusion based on this, because like our first sort of discombobulation with the game was, why do these people love each other so much and the game and love and hate us, the makers? And it was something because of this collective suffering that the game facilitates through its brutality, frankly. And often it is at the hands of another group. So, but you're still doing it more like it is a sport. It's like Liverpool and Manchester United kind of rivalry. Sure, it can be quite extreme.
There's still a layer of abstraction,
a
plausible deniability almost.
But there is something, I think, as we have kind of taken, as we've made the world safer and safer and safer, for good reasons. I'm not like, that's a good plan. But the outlet then still needs to be there. Where is our moment of collective suffering?
Yeah. So just to put a finer point on it, does the suffering come from the fact that these are valuable things, the rules are always enforced, they're enforced beyond the control of people, they're known rules that can be exploited by others? Like, is that where the suffering comes from?
I think the suffering really comes from is that in this case, the mechanic of the game is world domination, and it's about war. And obviously that is terrible, and we should just take that from planet Earth and put it in online so we can all be happy over here and
sure.
unhappy over there. But there is something about that.
Yeah.
Fighting for limited set of resources against another tribe is pretty fundamental.
Yeah.
So the suffering comes from, here's a playground where the rules are clear, but our rules, which is our culture, is our own making. Like there is no DAO that algorithmically enforces that I have your back if you're going to this fight.
Absolutely.
I'm going to have your back. There's no DAO to implement that. It's a trust amongst us. And trusting other people and building that trust, and it does take time. There's actually a formula. It's proximity, duration, frequency, and intensity. CAA invented this formula. CAA gets most of its intel through friendship. So they have mechanized it. And we have kind of retrofitted that on top of almost backtracing, interviewing EVE players and asking them, why have you done this for 20 years? Okay, it's because you have friends. Why do you attribute the friendship you have through EVE Online more than the friendship you have in reality? It's been a very fruitful element to talk to veterans from militaries around the world.
Yeah.
And they usually equate it with this, the intensity of life and death forges like relationship like at a speed that nothing else does. And then they explain to us how our game does that for them, which is obviously very humbling. I come from Iceland. We don't even have a military. We're extremely spoiled when it comes to that.
Can you say a little bit about specifically how you're thinking about crypto in the context of the next EVE projects?
What I'm hearing, when we announced we're going to make a crypto game, we announced that last year just to, get all the bad stuff on the table. We're making a crypto game. I promise it's going to be good. I promise. It was very similar when we said we were going to make a game on a database. Like EVE Online is the first database game, believe that or not. Tim here used to work on Ultima Online. Remembers well, he was just storing the state of Ultima Online in a flat file on the server disk. And when I said, we're going to use a database to make an MMO, people were like, weird. Some elves in Iceland are going to use a database to make an MMO. Silly people. And I just intuitively, we're going to store value. It's going to have to be transacted. We have to build it on like good foundations. And whether it's slow or whatever, databases were quite slow 20 years ago, we'll just work around that. So I'm hearing a lot of that played back to me now. It was like, blockchains are very slow.
That's right.
Yeah, they're like databases 20 years ago. We have a trick for that. And then, economic value, all these, the game won't be fun, etc., etc. And I point them to player auctions in Hong Kong that sells you spaceships in EVE Online and ISK. Like there's no tomorrow. Like I was asking you about non-transferability.
Yeah, right.
It's happening anyway.
Yes.
When I look at my own data, it's rampant. People are doing it. They claim they don't want it, but
they do.
I have just facts to prove otherwise. There's about $1 million per month of liquidation happening in EVE. I've also calculated, if I look at EVE Online, the aggregated economy, and if I look at the assets on average that people have, and if I transpose that to the offshore market value in Hong Kong, then people's savings in EVE Online are on average $1,300. And I found statistics that the average saving of the average American is $500, which is shockingly low. And I was thinking, okay, I have a lot of people from America that play online. They have more savings in online than they have in their bank account. If something happens to them, I mean, they should be able to pull on that.
Yeah.
If they need to pay a medical bill and the 500 isn't enough and they have 1,300 in EVE, who am I to prevent that really?
Right.
They've spent 20 years accumulating all this savings in EVE Online, and maybe their children have a problem or they have a problem. Why would I disallow that? What is the moral principle of making that wrong? And then of course you have to go through the whole stack of AML, anti-money laundering, KYC, okay, we could do that. Second Life has done that. It can be done. MMO-like experiences have done this. So a Swedish game called Project Entropia that's run on that premise for about 20 years. But there's an interesting liquidity problem in that concept, is that there's no counter buyer other than people inside the world.
That's right, yeah.
So this idea with okay, we need to solve for the liquidity, and okay, here are crypto nerds that have bottled up $1 trillion of loose liquidity. If somebody were to play an MMO for 20 years, accumulate thousands of dollars in saving, needs to liquidate quickly because they need to pay a medical bill, well, okay, if we merge these two things together, good things should be able to come from that. Yeah, I started to have these thoughts after, like I said, okay, I am basically Hammurabi, clay tablets or a database. I'm not going to live forever. I can't really promise that somebody's going to take care of it, claiming that I'm some saint. But still, it's hard. I've been in the meetings where we have to uphold the ontology of the world. It's very easy when you have 60 million people that play EVE Online. There are extremely powerful psychological levels when you have a game. You can see kind of the sort of, if you play a mobile free-to-play game, these are powerful psychological drivers. You can basically print money. And it just doesn't feel like, okay, if we are to make a virtual world more meaningful than real life, and we're just on the spigot of printing money for corporate profits, which we also do, obviously, we are a company, but is that the best premise of building it? Is there another way to build the premise where it does truly belong to the people playing it, and there is a collective aligned interest from everyone participating in the economy, also us as a bit of an operator, but we have the same alignment with everyone. Our savings are also in the economic value of the game.
Yeah, that's a very interesting, very powerful idea. Just out of curiosity, what were the original motivations for using a database to start with?
It's an interesting fact. Nobody at CCP had ever made the game when we made EVE Online. It's the first game made in Iceland, and we had never met a game developer. We had not even seen a game developer from afar. I'm looking at Tim here. We were just so not game developers. But what we had done is that there was a company in Iceland founded in '92 to make the metaverse. So we had made a VRML browser, virtual reality modeling language. It was the hot thing in the 90s. It was supposed to be the 3D internet, very Neil Stephenson Snow Crash inspired. We had dancing aliens. We were broadcasting contrast. Internet World 98, we owned it. We had a motion captured singer in New York singing live on the internet in full motion capture to thousands of people over voice over IP and God knows what. And nobody needed the metaverse. But to make the metaverse work on 286s required some serious understanding of network stacks and whatnot. So we more had sort of enterprise software developers rather than game developers. We were more coming from that background because we didn't have any game training. So it's just natural to us. We're basically doing a banking application with a fancy graphical UI. We would just build it like a bank. So
makes sense.
It was just absurd to do it in a different way.
I recall I've gone back and passed around. Do you think you could say a little bit about if you were an entrepreneur, a young entrepreneur again, and what would you do differently given what you know now and given what we have with crypto today? How would you think about it differently?
So it's very much this element of like find 10,000 people that love what you're doing. Like I would really like keep that in mind. I think with crypto, everything moves so quickly around. So you have a lot of this sort of, there are a million people maybe liking what you're doing, but there are not 10,000 people that love it. I would find that path. Like EVE Online is very much that. It's just like we're making a spaceship game. We like it, and if you like it, come. We're taking that kind of almost to the extreme. I mean, you're all invited to join. Just go to projectawakening.io. Then you can play what we're making on the 21st of May. You can also sign up to the hackathon and whatnot. That's very much made in the spirit that people are going to love it, they're going to hate it, but there are going to be no ambivalence. You're going to be in either camp. And starting there and then diffusing into mainstream is an underestimated value chain. If you look at many things in the world, they started as niches. Like Metallica was making, like they go from, I don't know, Masters of Puppet to what they become. Like even if you start small, it doesn't mean you stay small.
That's right.
Most things, I mean, everything about Apple was a niche cult in the beginning. It still is a bit of a cult, but it's not niche.
They've figured out how to scale that. Yeah. Just before I ask my next one, are there other slides that we didn't look at that are cool? I don't know.
I mean, there are cool slides here. Yeah.
There's a lot.
So this is like, okay. So we actually have a bit of an invention in what we're building. Is that we have this concept of energy, which is somewhat our way for addressing Sybil attacks in MMOs. So Sybil attacks in MMOs are basically botting. People write extremely sophisticated software to have AI play EVE Online. It's very hard to fight because the cost of the botter inside the world economy is basically zero. It's their AWS bill to run the bots. So that a focused human in the world has a very poor ability to compete with 10,000 bots.
Of course.
The game is not designed for that. So we introduced this idea of energy, like which is every agency in the world costs energy. It's a bit inspired by gas cost for opcodes, which we also have because we're also making our own blockchain. We're crazy people. But we also have this world currency, which is scale decoupled from the opcodes, etc., etc. And that gives us like a fundamental new tool to make the game fair for humans against AI.
Is the basic idea that there is a marginal cost imposed on specific actions in the game?
Yes. So, but think more about it as, so the game gives you agency in the world. You can do something in the world. And how to limit agency, we're gonna do like opcode accounting, but for agency. So every time you make an action, we have an estimation of like how much agency is this giving you. If you take a starship, move it from one solar system to another solar system, it has huge strategic relevance.
So it would have a higher cost.
So it would have a higher cost, indeed. And then, okay, now we basically have energy. And okay, what's a good proxy for energy? Obviously, oil is a good proxy. And then we started to talk to people in the oil industry, and we learned everything about it. And oh my God, that thing is well game designed. Like, and here is schematics for refining. So we have all transposed this into sci-fi. So you have to mine crude matter through rifts in the universe, la 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 la. It's all very fancy. Then you have to refine it into multiple sort of products, etc., etc. Remember the Matt Sankey chart from later on. You make this hideous complexity, etc., etc. And this complexity actually plays a purpose in building friendship and love and all that. because somebody has to understand it to make
Yeah.
it easy for others.
Totally. No one person can handle all these pieces. So
Exactly.
people have to specialize. And when they specialize around this need to economize, then together they can do something greater than individually. Yeah.
Spot on.
Okay. Great. That's beautiful. Yeah, that's great. Maybe one last one, just because some people ask me, how do you think about, like, and this was definitely true in Eve's early days and is true again today, how do you think about hiring around new technologies, right, where you're trying to do things that haven't quite been done before? Is there a way that you think about hiring technologists?
We are stealing a lot from ourselves when it comes to the technology. Like a lot of the technology and techniques, we've already trained people how to operate on. And sure, like the blockchain stuff is a little different. I mean, it becomes maybe a lot different when you're into sort of zero knowledge proofs, etc., which we are dabbling in quite a bit, because you also have to be able to create information asymmetry. Everything being transparent on a blockchain is not very good for a for a war simulator. Like you need to be able to have secrets. So when you go into that, then you're quite off script when it comes to. But what we have found is that as soon as we announced this and the work got out, just all the people that know how to do that came to us kind of on their own, because all the CK people need almost like a simulated environment to test their ideas at some scale. And we both have scale and kind of an alibi for interaction. Like most of the sort of cryptography stuff involves having secrets. I mean, cryptography is literally about having secrets. And usually secrets mean that people that place value on secrets are trying to hide something from somebody. So that can often go very like a left turn to a dark place. But in a game like Eve, it's all basic premise of the game.
Yeah.
Now I need to maintain secrets from my enemy, and voila, it's now in the alibi of interaction of a game. Now all the CK people are excited about, like, okay, can we try to make a cloaking field out of CK math? Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, totally. Amazing. Amazing. All right. Well, I think we're done with this time frame. I think we have some time for Q&A.
You mentioned that you get inspiration from oil. And you also mentioned like numerous people from history. How do you think about where to get inspiration and when you need inspiration? Yeah, just curious how you think about that.
When we were making Game Online, we were, like I said, not game developers. I was a computer scientist. We had a guy with a PhD in chaos physics. We had people of the streets of Reykjavik, which were very artistic. It was a very cross-disciplinary, sort of multi-faceted thing. It's an artifact of the smallness of Iceland. Nobody can really specialize much. You always have to kind of, like, your social network is full of weird people. Like, you cannot just be a doctor interfacing with doctors. So there was a lot of sort of anthropomorphic debates about, like, everyone was reading Selfish Gene and like how do we implement evolutionary stable strategies in an MMO, if you were in the CCP cantina at lunch, the people were debating neo-Darwinism and these kind of things. And I think that just naturally, sort of in a iron sharpens iron kind of way, became this kind of, okay, now we're taking all that into this thing that it became. And then we have found, so when I've tried to recreate it with, like, first we had a period where we were having economists make economies, and we quickly understood that economies are great at analyzing, optimizing, understanding economies. They can be good at making them, but it's not necessarily a skill that they would have naturally. And we started to understand you need physics people to make composable emergence, because physics is composable emergence and chemistry is an ecology. So you need more physicists, chemists, ecologists, sociologists to kind of decompose our world into actionable things on the other side. So that's why we see something complex like the the crude oil economy, then it's like, oh my God, here is an emergent thing out of core properties that have been put on the planet for us to play with. How can we transpose that in so we can build something with the same emergence power? And generally, people with physics training, they're trained to reason through these kind of things. People can also be trained in it through other means. But so inspiration comes a lot from decomposing either history or our current world. And once we have decomposed it, how can we transpose into our own coordinate system of this game? It's a lot of abstract reasoning, as you hear.
Over the years, what are some of the more notable examples of emergent phenomena that you've encountered?
To kind of take the pinnacle of the extreme to explain how far it emerges is that people have cut power lines to their enemies' houses in the real world. Like, imagine the madness that has to exist for somebody to find a group of people in another country, find the power supply to a house, because usually people are enemies a little bit across culture. There's a very much sort of where your existing friends network comes into the game. Find the power line, time when it happens, and do it. Like, imagine the madness. So that is, I mean, this takes a decade to happen. So that is like an emergent sort of, like this is the tip of an iceberg to kind of explain where the emergence become. Another element is we have the Guinness World Record of the most amount of people fighting online in one session. Something about 8,000 people. The next game is less than 1,000, and most games are really sub-100. So if you go to a typical Fortnite match, I mean, maybe 64, some FPSs have gone to like 200, 300, and EVE is at 8,000. And we get a lot of calls from people which are building scalable computing for games where you could have like tens of thousands of people interacting on the same time using our technology. And they never really go anywhere because getting 10,000 people to do anything is extremely hard. It's really just concerts, sports matches, and protests where you have sort of 10,000 people agreeing to do something. Maybe it's like a Burning Man event or something like that.
Yeah. And even then, like in the concert setting or those settings,
exactly.
It's kind of a single player replicated 10,000 times.
Yeah. You're an audience to a performer, something like Burning Man is interesting. It's kind of you're in a virtual society. Still, it took a long time for Burning Man to scale up to those numbers. The other thing is military engagement. Military engagement can be tens of thousands of people. But to be able to do that, we need to develop military doctrines. We need to train people. It takes hundreds of years to train militaries to do this. So EVE players trained. It took them a decade to get to 10,000, and some of it was technical limits on our side, getting 10,000 people to simulate spaceships and destruction at the same time. It's not easy, but it was mostly their effort of training military doctrines, training soldiers, building economies, saving up for a year, plan the military engagement, and then execute it all inside the game with people which are basically volunteering and often like taking like. There are like SMS call trees when they were doing this. People were running out of cinemas to do their bidding for it's happening now. Okay, I'll go and cut the power lines. I fetch the people from the cinema. Blah, blah, blah. Like imagine the level of coordination and human kind of potential to get 10,000 people to prep for a year for a war that takes 7 days, put a Guinness World Record. Like, that is the level of emergence that we've seen.
Yeah, so this scale of multiplayer is itself an emergent phenomenon that requires many, many things to be layered on top for it to ever happen, regardless of strict technical limitations.
Yeah.
Makes total sense. I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Thanks, Hilmar. Big fan of Eve, and I started playing 2007, but never was a master of it. So I remember when I played it, whenever there was a big battle around a galaxy, the network get like super clogged, and everyone's like clogged there. I think it's very similar to how, I mean, whenever there's a big event or good event in the crypto world, the network got clogged. So I'm wondering, like, what did you guys do to improve this, and whether, like, what can people borrow from this, and I mean, bring it into crypto world to improve it, or maybe the other way around?
So there is a fight for block space everywhere in anything. Like it ends up in a limit which is kind of like block space. It's very extreme in crypto because there needs to be consensus about the blocks and yada, yada, yada. But still, like, ultimately, even if we have our own database, there's a bottleneck in what can stream into the database. So there's a limit in the simulation frames of our physics engine of like what hits a time tick in the way the physics in EVE Online tick. So what hits in the block of time increment in how our physics engine ticks matters a lot in whether a spaceship survives or doesn't survive. And then as the game grew, people started to fight for this, and there's a mechanism built into our sort of supercomputing architecture we built, such that there's a queue to get into the frames. But the queue becomes very unpredictable of like, okay, when is my message going to go into the queue and meet into the frame to go into the simulation? So while we could increase the block space by making the system more performant, it is never performant enough for the time frame of the simulation step to onboard all the actions that people have put into the system. This is very similar to crypto. So once we figured out this is a never-ending warfare, we implemented time dilation. So time just slows down. And that's a very interesting way to approach it, because that also happens in our own life. If there's a lot going on, time dilates. So our time perception is very much correlated with what's going on. So by doing time dilation, we actually allowed people to strategize more, because when you're interacting with 10,000 spaceships, like giving orders what to do at what time, if you have to do it in real time, there's only so much you can do. So by doing time dilation, stretching the increment, just making it go slower, we created like a meta game where people are now sort of metagaming on top of the time dilation. So I don't know how that would transpose into crypto, but I'm just more emphasizing this is not a unique phenomenon of crypto. Any shared simulation involving shared state will have this. Even our own new universe works like this. There is a simulation step. I mean, the whole thing, are we living in a simulation? I mean, it stretches the concept of a simulation. If you stretch the concept of a simulation enough, yes, we're living in a simulation. It's obviously ticking. There's a time increment. Yeah, so by doing time dilation, we actually both address the technical foundation and make the game, in a way, more fun to play.
Very interesting. I am curious to think about how that would apply to crypto. Fascinating. But anyway, I know we're out of time. Hilmar, thank you again for joining us.